Good morning. I'm sorry not to be there. In my juggling of all the things, I'm still on call at the hospital where I work. So I'm here virtually, but I am glad to be more present given some wonderful feedback from Mike on sermons. So I want this to be more conversational, other than the presentations that I've written before. I want to talk about the wisdom of doing nothing. I like these provocative paradoxes because I have learned, mostly painfully, that life really does seem paradoxical because we have the way we want things to be. We have the way we think things should be. We are reactive and even avoidant when it comes to life. But one of my very favorite things about Unity is the way it teaches us to live, and it teaches us to engage with what's real. And I have had the privilege to work as a chaplain for the last 5 years. And one of the biggest things that has surprised me in ministry is that very often what is needed is nothing. And that's an overly provocative way to put it. But what I mean by that, I call it minimalist ministry, where the best approach is the lightest touch. Isn't that interesting? And it won't surprise any of you that I'm kind of intense. Like, I'm a lot in all contexts, not this one. And it has been priceless to practice that light touch, to figure out what is needed, what is my role. And men in general need to learn to shut up and sit down, right? Like, we're so used to taking up attention that it has been incredibly valuable for me to learn to be quiet, to be that quiet, nurturing presence. And so I want to spend some time talking about the importance of doing nothing, getting to where we can do nothing. And then once we master not needing to do anything, how can we engage in a productive way? And the framing that I want us to go home with, or stay home if you're already there, is this idea of being in the flow of life. I'll hold this carefully. This is a little Yeti plant. I hope all of you can see it clearly. My youngest, my 10-year-old Miriam, saw this at the store where it was strategically placed, and naturally we had to buy it, right? But the wonderful thing about this Yeti plant that I have managed to keep alive while she's not here is if you see this little, do you see that little purple flower on top? And the amazing thing is the original flower is dead, like right here on this. And somehow, you know how kids are. She's like, "Oh, thank you for this little flower that you picked. I'm going to stick it in this water or this plant so it'll live." And you're like, "It's going to be dead in like 12 hours." I didn't say that, but we all think that, right? When our kids are like, "Oh, I'm going to take care of this thing that's going to be dead next week." But amazingly, it actually lived. This little tiny beauty, some of you may know, my oldest daughter would know what kind of plant this is, but this adorable little purple flower has taken root, and now it is alive in this little planter. And that is how life works. Life has its own wisdom, and the wisdom of life is intricate and delicate and powerful and fragile all at once. Now, what would happen if I pulled up this plant to see how it worked, to see how it was growing, or if I overwatered this? If we try to impose control on these processes of life, it is almost always counterproductive. And so this is the wisdom of plants. Plants, there's a book, the Secret Life of Trees. And trees are amazing. Many of you may know that here in Salt Lake, in Utah, we have the largest or heaviest organism in the entire world. It's Pando. It's this what looks like an aspen forest, but it's actually a single male aspen tree that weighs 6 million pounds and covers hundreds of acres. And plants are amazing because they're incredibly sophisticated. They actually communicate, they listen, they have emotions as best as we can tell. They're conscious in some way that we understand. And so most plants can't move, right? I mean, they can turn toward the sun, away from the sun, but they need to thrive by living in this integrated relationship with their environment. And so again, our invitation is to align with the flow of life. And in order to do that, we need to learn to do nothing. And I want to give a metaphysical interpretation of Psalm 46:10. This is one that we're all very familiar with. Be still and know that I am God. The Hebrew word translated still means stop. Stop. Stop it. Like cease. And that aligns with the unity principle of release. So this is a unity way of putting it would be to say, release and know that you are divine. And what a summary that is, that we can let go, especially of our desire to be in control, and know that we are divine. The universe has our backs. We are the universe, and we can trust and have faith. In Taoism, there's this beautiful principle called Wu Wei, which means it's effortless action or active non-striving. And it very specifically refers to the kind of effort that is aligned with the flow of life, not striving, not fighting. And one of the great tragedies of Western culture, I think one reason why, apologies to Mike, but I think one thing that's unhealthy about our culture is we have cowboy culture. So it's like, do we ride it or kill it? That's an overstatement, of course. But I do think that for many reasons, we have this conquering conflict relationship with nature in Western culture. And one piece of wisdom that I'm grateful we are awakening to in our culture is the importance of remembering, awakening to the fact that we are nature. We are part of nature. And so again, we need to be in the flow of nature. Buddhism also has a lot of wisdom around this. Buddhism teaches about non-attachment, non-dualism. It has the principle of emptiness and suchness. And all of these are ways of inviting us to let go of what we think is real so that we can enter into a relationship with what actually is real. This idea that life is not a defined set thing, but life is a river of reality. It's a stream of life, and we're part of it. So as soon as we define something, as soon as we cling to something, it's gone. And in fact, we can go even deeper, that it was never there. It was never there in the way that we think. So the only constant is change. That's the wisdom that Buddhism is trying to teach, is that there is no self in particular because we are different in every moment, in every context. Hospice, it's been such a gift to be a hospice chaplain for these past 5 years, because the entire philosophy of hospice is acceptance. The philosophy behind palliative care and hospice care is that you aren't trying to get better. You aren't fighting the process of decline and death, because just as life has wisdom, death has wisdom. And it's been very interesting to see the contrast between hospice chaplaincy and hospital chaplaincy. Because in the hospital, of course, patients are brought into the emergency room and there are heroic, expensive interventions. Very often a patient will come in dead and the medical staff will do all of these things, CPR and these other interventions, and the patient will still be dead. Sometimes it's the right thing to do and they come back. And I have heard amazing stories of, I was talking to this man who the day before had 9 liters of blood transfused through him. We only have 4.5. Like medicine is a miracle, and that's amazing. I do think that hospital can learn from hospice, though. And it is a very powerful thing to work with the flow of life as that flow of life is moving toward transition. And one of our doctors in our last meeting says, I am aggressive about doing nothing. Isn't that a fun meditation? Maybe fun isn't the right word, but I really respect that, because what happens is, again, in our culture, in our Western interventionist, there has to be a pill for this, there has to be a surgery for this. And again, I'm not in any way minimizing the power of those interventions. I just think we need to be more wise about those interventions. And I think that we spend a tremendous amount of effort and resources resisting reality because we haven't done the deeper work of doing nothing. And this is what the hospice doctor meant when he said, I'm aggressive about doing nothing, because very often, and so my work as a hospice chaplain is to help people die, to help patients and family members accept the reality of death, transition, whatever we want to call it, and not resist it, but flow with it, so that we can then have a good death or a good transition. When I was doing chaplain training, we would playfully check each other when someone was being a fix-it fairy or a feel-good fairy. So the paradox is, the purpose of ministry is not to make people feel better, or it is to make people feel better, but not directly. And this is where we get into these paradoxes. So let's talk about getting ourselves to where we can do nothing. We have to train ourselves into a version where we can do nothing. And of course, by nothing, I mean the minimum elegant light touch. One reason why I've seen so few people in active death, like seeing them die, is because very often I will check in with the family, I'll spend time with the family, and I will leave. Because the best thing I can do for the family in that moment is not be there. And it took training and learning for me to be sensitive to that like the best thing is to be quiet. The best thing is even to leave. The best presence is absence. So again, we need to get ourselves to the point where we can comfortably do nothing. So what prevents us from doing nothing? I think very often what prevents us from doing nothing is our own anxiety, our fear. And this is another paradox. I call this the empathy backfire effect, because we think that empathy, our ability to feel what others feel, is good, right? It helps us care for others, it helps us help others. And that's true, but it also backfires, because as soon as we feel someone else's discomfort and pain, it becomes our discomfort and pain. And I want you to sit with this for a moment. A friend had a great phrase where she said, helping is the sunny side of control. Isn't that brilliant? Where it's very important that when we want to help someone, we ask ourselves, are we helping them for their sake, or are we helping them for our sake? And the most important thing that we need to do, I cannot overstate the importance of this, is that we need to build up our endurance, our resilience, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, being at peace in the presence of sadness. And this is literally ministry training. Like the training of a chaplain is so that I can maintain calm and present no matter what the emotional temperature is, and where I can meet people where they are. There, it's called transference and countertransference, where like your stuff comes up because of what you are experiencing in other people. And so the first step to doing nothing is to managing our own feelings and our own process. And when we see someone suffering, we feel discomfort and helplessness and fear very often. And so we try to control. We try to control it. We try to manage it through control rather than letting it flow, being in that flow of life. And the main point that I want to make in this discussion is that we best facilitate wholeness and health when we align ourselves with the flow of life. There is a tremendous wisdom. So we are the most wise when we align ourselves and enter into the flow of life's wisdom. Life has extraordinary wisdom. How do you heal a wound? You don't heal a wound. The wound heals itself. Life has its own wisdom. So what do? You keep it clean. I point to my finger because I accidentally like cut off the tip of my finger when I was cooking, and I like held my hand really tight, and I finished dinner. But it's amazing how the body heals. And so, yes, we do need to make a minimal amount of intervention so that the body can heal itself. And so in our relationships, the right target is the minimal amount of intervention needed to facilitate the person's own ability. And this is why, as a minister, as a chaplain, I don't heal others. I facilitate their own healing. And this is tremendously and powerfully congruent with unity principles, because we are all divine. We are all life. We are all love. We are all already connected to this wisdom and this flow. So the first thing to do is we need to be okay with not feeling okay. Here's the next challenge. Resistance is never productive. Again, in our Western culture, we love sports, we love fighting, we love conflict. And Eastern wisdom that's becoming more and more popular is about that flow and go with the flow. I did a jujitsu trial with my son. I want to do more of it. And I liked jujitsu because it's not like punching, kicking. It's like using the person's own momentum and working with it. So I want you to think about, first, our brains do not understand no. So if you say, don't do this, don't eat this, don't think about this, all our brains will hear is like, oh yeah, do that, eat that, think about that, do that thing. And so the best way to work is to flow with what already is. So there's redirection over resistance. There's something called a triangulation paradox in systems theory, where what do we want to do when we see someone doing something wrong? We're like, stop it, clean your room, don't be such a slob. I'm thinking of children. And I do not talk to my children like this. But what happens is there's a triangle where there's us, the person we're talking to, and the issue. And if we point out the issue, like, why are you like this? Why do you do this? Why do you have a problem with this? What's happening is we are weakening the relationship between us and the person, and we are strengthening the relationship between the person and the issue. Isn't that interesting? So as soon as we bring up any problem, we increase the problem. And so the way to flow with the way to do nothing about the problem is to strengthen your relationship with the person and empower and facilitate and incentivize them to resolve the problem themselves. Do you see how that's different? So the best thing to do is to strengthen the relationship, focus on them, focus on love and life, and they will resolve the problem in their own process. And again, this is very congruent with the way that we do denials and affirmations in unity. We gently deny all of those things that are not life-affirming and unproductive, and then we affirm that which is life-affirming and productive. And when I was doing my unity courses, we talked about the irony that like your denials can't be too strong, or you will be giving power to the denials. They need to be gentle and flowing. So when we plug into the principle of life, of love, and abundance, we can practice faith, we can trust life, we can trust the divine. Once we master doing nothing, once we are comfortable doing nothing, we can then engage in a constructive way because we can practice minimal engagement. Our target is not to manage our own resistance or manage we don't need to feed our own sense of control. We say, what is the principle of life here? What is the healthiest approach here? Okay, what is the minimal amount that I need to do to facilitate that process? So we nourish the process of life. I love the serenity prayer, which of course is, give me courage, like serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. But I think even that is limited because the serenity prayer, as amazing as it is, again, it separates into this binary of like, what can you control and what can't you control? Whereas really the answer is beyond the serenity prayer. It is the wisdom not of distinguishing between control and acceptance or change and acceptance, but to embrace the wisdom of nature, which is paradoxically and in this beautiful integrated way, nature is the constant process of change. It's the constant flow of life that requires death. Like my daughter's little plant, there is the dead blossom, it was the dying plant, there is the living plant, there is the newly living plant. There's this wisdom of life and death and flow that is life, and it's bigger than us. So again, we need to nourish the process of life. One of my very favorite poems is Summer Day by Mary Oliver. There is such wisdom in Mary Oliver's poem. And so this talks about the flow of life. She says, "Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away." I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down into the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So the target, the invitation, is to respect and facilitate the process of each person's one wild and precious life. And one current challenge that I am living into, I'm so grateful to have been able to cultivate skills as a minister. And as a minister, I have been able to simultaneously assess where someone is, assess their path of growth, figure out how to facilitate them along that path of growth, and then let go. And go with the flow of life and process and honor their right to go through their one wild and precious life. So the question ends up being, how much nothing can we do? What is the minimal amount we can intervene so that we can facilitate and flow with the divinity and let the life flow through each person and interaction? So that is my invitation for us to intervene and control as little as possible so that life can do as much as it needs to. Thank you.